You're in the Business Insurance Zone with me, Steve Savant, national financial columnist and money color commentator. This week on The Biz, simple and straightforward retirement. And on today's show, an introduction to retirement for most Americans with our special guest, Jonathan Illig, Retirement Income Architecture, right here on The
When
Biz.
it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.
Well, welcome everyone to the Business Insurance Zone. I'm your host, Steve Savant, and we're broadcasting live to a nationwide audience of financial advisors right here in Fountain Hills, Arizona, home of America's largest fountain. And with me, my guest today, John Illig. Well, welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
John, everybody that's watching our television show is always asking me the same thing. Well, Steve, I know I should be saving money for retirement. Our whole show is built on finding other ways to save you money so that I can park money in retirement. But when you talk about retirement, it seems so complicated today. It seems sophisticated. And a lot of Americans really have pretty straightforward, retirement ideas. Social Security, we know some format, hopefully it's going to be there, right? When we don't know what the degree, but really for the baby boomers, and right now they're discussing the demarcation line on Social Security is going to be about anybody 55 and up is probably going to be left alone. Anybody below that demarcation line is probably going to have to look at a different format and a different design for Social Security. So most people 55 and older are looking at Social Security. Now, the reason I have John on today is because John is an income expert and a major designer in the United States, and even has a software that professionals use in their practice to really design retirement modeling. Now, when I talk about it, I want a basic, we're talking about basic retirement income. Tell me a little bit about what I need to look at. I'm just a normal American. I want to put money aside. What am I looking at?
Well, I believe in a process, Steve, where for the typical normal American, when they're going to retire, they need to look at their retirement income really in two separate income streams, each of which has a different purpose. The first one we call foundation income, and just as it sounds, it's simply adding up the amount of income you're going to need to provide for your basic needs during retirement.
Now does a consumer, do we have to then figure out, we have to figure out what we are going to have to spend?
Absolutely.
So we're going to have to do a budget.
Absolutely.
And it's going to have to be a retirement budget, not the way we're using today while we're earning, but a budget that we're going to need when we retire.
Absolutely, and we split that budget between two different types of income needs, Steve. One, again, we call the foundation, the other we call discretionary. Really simple difference between the two. How much income or expenses am I going to have to meet my basic needs? How much is my fund money? It's really quite that simple. We call one foundation income in the planning process, the other discretionary income. The two combined are your total retirement income.
Well, I'm thinking, I don't know if everybody's going to have a house payment by the time they're hit retirement. Hopefully no.
Hopefully no.
Hopefully no. But they're going to look at utilities, the house payment if it's there, car insurance, plates, my food, my clothing, all these allowances. I have to really, I think a lot of times we enter into our senior years and we're not prepped to go from our earning years to our retirement years, and we have to do a complete budget again.
Quite often we do, because it actually goes a little bit farther than that, Steve, because when we look at the retirement income planning process and we do extensive forecasting and things like that, not only that, but we have to look at what changes in those spending or might have to occur. My favorite example, you just mentioned it. A lot of people, especially our boomers these days, are retiring with mortgages in place. Well, a key part of even looking at how much retirement income ultimately you're going to need as well as want is, when will that mortgage be paid off? Because that's typically a big section of the total retirement income need. So we want to put things like that into the total plan so that we can get the best possible forecast for the consumer that we possibly can.
Now, I know a lot of people are going to be carrying mortgages into their retirement. There's no doubt about that, and that's a major expense to be sure. And some of them are starting to pay bi-monthly or bi-weekly so that they can actually maybe chop off maybe 6-7 years at the end of their mortgage, at least accelerate it a little bit without injuring or kind of messing with their cash flow. Now, for people who have this issue, when I'm looking at modeling, is this going to change the way they attack? Because a mortgage is a major piece of the pie, and Social Security, even if that's a piece of that, I don't know that's going to really be able to be covering that.
No, typically it isn't. So the process that we go to, particularly on what we call the foundation income, or easier way to put it is just the needs, is Social Security, pensions if they're lucky enough to have one still, and what we call other secure income sources are the first thing we look at to fill, if you will, that basic foundation income need. In most cases, Social Security, even when we have two benefits coming in a married couple is typically not enough to fill that entire foundation income need. And so that's when we start looking at how do we best use their retirement savings assets to fill the rest of what we call the foundation income gap, which is simply the difference between what is Social Security, again, pension if they're lucky enough to have one, how much does that fill, and the difference between that and what they must have to remain comfortable. We call that the gap, and that's the first thing we attack in the retirement income planning process.
Well, John, you just said that they're lucky to have it. I mean, is your experience showing you that a lot of Americans don't have anything but Social Security?
Quite a bit. We're still seeing it all over the map, but it's very, very common for people to just have Social Security and their retirement savings, whether that's IRAs, 401ks, or whatever it is. And those pensions that we do see, Steve, tend to be fairly small. And in my experience, it's typically a pension. I might call it a legacy pension. It's typically from something they did earlier in their career. And they're still able to activate it once they retire. And even more disturbing, most of those pensions that certainly I see don't even have a cost of living increase attached to them. It's just going to be a flat amount.
In your modeling, you put inflation in this.
Absolutely. In fact, we attack inflation in a slightly different way, or perhaps fundamentally different way than a lot of people do. It's been my experience that a lot of people, when they're trying to figure out that inflation piece, they quite often are perhaps overstating it. And let me just talk about that for a moment.
When we come back, we're going to talk about all this because inflation is a big piece of the pie. And if you're not including this in your retirement plan, that's a big mistake. So we have to modify the way we think about inflation, cost of living. I call it the real cost of living.
Yeah.
When we come back from the break, we'll talk all about that.
You're listening to the insurance industry's #1 resource for products, planning ideas, carrier information, and interviews you can use. When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.
Did you know the average 401k runs out of money just 7 to 8 years into retirement? Time Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, and many other publications have warned of the difficulty of saving with a 401k. But what if there was a way to create tax-free lifetime retirement income with no stock market risk? Good news, there is.
You know, living in fear of the next market dive is not the way I want to live my life.
Why would I go out there and take on risk when I don't need to?
I have a lot less stress knowing I can't lose any more of my retirement savings in the stock market.
Call now to receive your free, no-obligation analysis of what this retirement vehicle could do for you, a comparison to your current retirement plan, and a free video that explains this exciting opportunity. Start planning a retirement you can enjoy instead of worrying about future tax increases and stock market losses. Creating income that will last your entire life is the most important thing you'll ever do. Take control of your future. Call now for your free analysis, comparison, and video.
Well, welcome back to our second segment, 2 for the show. And of course, we're with income architect, expert, and aficionado, I have to say, and John Illig. John, we're talking, when we hit the break, we're talking about inflation. Now, here's one thing, it's a major gripe with me. I'll try not to get on my bandwagon here. But the government puts out an inflation number, and they tie it to Social Security and other things. Right. But I have found that the real cost of living isn't inflation, it's more, and some of the things that are in my true cost of living aren't incorporated into the inflation. What's with that?
Absolutely. One of the key ones is energy. They throw out energy, and I think a lot of the different types of food costs. They do it because you just hit it on the head. Inflation increases or COLA increases to things like Social Security, but a host of other government benefits as well are tied to that inflation rate. And so I personally believe that's the reason they don't count those things. The economists or the government economists will give us a lot of, gobbledygook, if you will, about why they actually do it. I think it's to keep that rate down.
Well, I think the hard cost, we keep track of inflation. I have charts on this going way back, and I'm talking very far back. But I also keep cost of living and the loss of consumer purchasing power. Because to me, that's the issue, and especially when you're heading to retirement. This is a major issue to consider. So when we're talking about, as you said in the first segment, foundation.
Right.
We're doing all our foundation. I'm trying to figure out what are my utility bills going to be, and it's hard to say, what are my utility bills going to be in 20 years? What is my food price? What's the gasoline going to be? Hopefully, we're into shale and doing all these things. We have all this abundant energy in the United States. I hope we get to tap it. So when I'm looking at my foundation, my basic commodities, my needs.
Right.
I want to be able to price that out, figure out what I'm going to need, and then one big thing that consumers don't do, and I find this a shock, is to figure out what I think is going to be my life expectancy, which, by the way, shockingly enough, we can actually calculate that now. Get in the game. It's a good estimation. It's not a pure science, of course.
Yeah.
But it gets us in the game. Now, when we talk about foundations and we have all this done, my goodness, we might have a little above the line. We might have a little cash flow. We might have a little discretionary income.
Absolutely.
Why do you bring this up? Because I would have thought you would have just stayed on the budget. Here's what we have. Whatever is above the line, we'll just go ahead and do that. But people need to know, do I need to develop like an emergency fund during retirement? Do I still need to park money for my Medicare, my medicine? Will I have different health categories that I need to park money on?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, always you need an emergency fund, whether that's pre-retirement or post-retirement. I mean, that's just a given. What we do in our planning process is we look at the medical expenses, or at least what we think the medical expenses are going to be. And again, you can't completely predict the future. We inflate those at a higher rate of inflation, for example, than perhaps we might inflate other things. And one of the key things when we look at this inflation thing in general, and I want really the people out there to really understand this, when you're trying to figure out this foundational income you're going to need, don't inflate things that don't inflate. For example, if you have a fixed rate mortgage, don't assign a 3 or 4% inflation rate to that. It's not going to go up if it's fixed rate, but that would really skew your numbers if you did that.
It would. I can totally see that, what you just said right now. And I think people they take their total budget, they list it, and then they put the number on it.
That's
4% inflation. That's a mistake.
That's exactly what they do. They're not looking at what we call changes to those expenses. Again, sooner or later that mortgage is going to be paid off, we hope.
Right.
But even at that, if it's a major portion of the budget and it's not going to inflate, but you inflate it, it skews your numbers and it looks scarier than it is. Versus some things inflate more than others. We typically like to look at inflating energy costs 4 or 5% a year, certainly medical costs. But other things don't inflate at quite that high a level. So inflation, well, there's certainly nothing wrong with assigning a given 3% or whatever it is might be in running it all out. You've really got to look at it in a little bit more depth and look at what's going to change or what potentially might change throughout the course of my retirement. One other really good example of that, Steve, is that most people when they retire, at least a lot of them, they want to do some traveling and stuff. I mean, it's what we're all trying to do here, have a nice life in retirement. But the fact of the matter is what happens with most people is as they get significantly older, they start to scale back on that, if for no other reason because physically it's more difficult for them. We want to take that into account when we're doing the entire retirement income forecast because, again, it has the effect of lowering, especially at the far end of retirement, what that overall income need might be, and therefore getting it more into the reality of what potentially could be,
So if I understand you correctly, the discretionary income, there's going to be everybody. I want to travel. I want to see my grandkids. I want to go out and do things. That's why we're retiring, to really do things we've never been able to have time for.
Golf club membership.
I'm there. Now, but you're saying, if I'm hearing correctly, it's going to start scaling down at certain ages.
We typically see that.
And we want to be able to incorporate that scale down or that less spending in discretion.
Absolutely, into the total plan, because it makes a huge difference in what the total amount of income over time that you're going to have to generate off those retirement savings assets. It makes a huge difference.
Well, that's our show for today. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or email me at steve@thebiz.tv. That's the Buzz on the Biz for today. You've been in the zone, the business insurance zone.
You're listening to the insurance industry's #1 resource for products, planning ideas, carrier information, and interviews you can use. When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.